If you think morgues are quiet places, that's probably because you've never heard the right stories. Get ready for a series of chilling morgue horror stories that'll make you rethink what really happens after the lights go out. Like the one you're about to hear, where the body of an elderly woman brought into the cold chamber seemed unwilling to rest, and left behind a trail of laughter in the dark that no one could explain. But before we dive into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The first thing that caught my attention that early morning was the silence. Not the usual silence of a morgue after hours, but a dense, stifling kind of silence, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I was on the night shift in the basement of the university hospital here in Montreal, sharing the shift with Claude, an older technician with his quirks but good at his job. We had already done a few autopsies that week, nothing out of the ordinary. Accidents, multiple organ failure, natural causes, the kind of stuff you learn to handle without feeling much. But that night, the atmosphere was different. It felt like the entire morgue had paused to listen. It was around 1:40 a.m. when the old lady's body arrived. Her file said her name was Margaret Tremblay, 87 years old, found dead at home by a neighbor who noticed the smell coming from under the door. Apparently, she lived alone, with no children, and her only emergency contacts were from a nursing home she had refused to go to. According to the preliminary report, the cause of death was natural, but protocol required an autopsy due to the state of decomposition. The body was already in an advanced stage of rigor mortis, with grayish skin and sunken eyes, but the strangest thing was her expression, a slight smile on her face, as if she had died laughing at something only she knew. Claude didn't say much, just muttered something in French about old people dying alone and dragging the cold with them. We started the routine procedure, checking the documents, external analysis, photos, collecting samples. Everything was going normally. I, as always, took care of the notes while he opened the chest with that metallic sound of bone being separated. Up to that point, everything was technical. But I swear, there was a moment when I felt a cold shiver running up my spine, and it wasn't because of the cold in the room. It was as if there was a negative energy there with us. I can't explain it. I looked at Claude to see if he had felt anything too, but he seemed oblivious focused. We finished the autopsy in a little over an hour. We didn't find anything beyond what was expected. A weak heart, calcified arteries, a compromised liver, typical signs of old age. We cleaned the body, placed it on the gurney, and took it to the cold chamber. The room was small, with 4 drawer compartments. Claude opened the middle compartment, and together we pushed the gurney until we heard the click of the lock. He locked the door with the key, as usual, and returned to our tiny office where we left reheated coffee and some pending files. About 10 minutes later, while we were reviewing another case file, we heard a dry noise coming from the direction of the cold chamber. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make both of us stop and look at each other. It sounded like the noise of a metal door slamming or opening. I was the first to stand up. I took the key in my pocket as a precaution. When I turned the corner, I felt that same shiver. And then came the detail that chilled me to the bone. The door of the chamber where we had placed Margaret was ajar. I ran back and called Claude. He grumbled but came with me. I told him I was sure the door had been locked. He replied that the lock was probably worn out or misaligned. He tried to rationalize, as he always did. We pushed the door slowly, and there was the body, still in the same position. No signs of movement. Everything apparently normal. We closed the door more firmly, tested the lock 3 times, and returned to the office. Claude got irritated, said he was going to the bathroom, and left complaining about his age and the bad coffee. I stayed there, organizing the papers. It must have been 3 or 4 minutes when I heard the bathroom door slam hard, then hurried steps in the hallway. Claude returned pale, sweating cold, with his eyes wide open in a way I had never seen before. I asked him what had happened, and he just said, "She looked at me." I didn't understand at first. I asked him to repeat, and he, with a trembling voice, said he had seen Margaret's face in the bathroom mirror, that she was standing behind him, with that same smile on her face, and that for a second he felt as if she were alive. I tried to calm him down. I told him he was tired, that mirrors deceive us, that it could just be a misinterpreted reflection, a trick of the light, but he didn't want to hear it. He grabbed his things and said he was leaving, that the night had been too strange already. He apologized but said he wouldn't stay another minute there. I was left alone in the office, looking down the hallway, where the fluorescent light began to flicker slightly, as if something was tampering with the wiring, or watching everything from the dark. I tried to convince myself that what happened to Claude was just exhaustion, that he was at his limit and saw what he wanted to see. But when the light started flickering again, right in front of the room where we kept the bodies, it became impossible to ignore the feeling that there was something there with me. A strange presence. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was that deep feeling of being watched, as if someone were right behind me, breathing slowly on the back of my neck. I stood up slowly and went to the circuit breaker panel, which was at the end of the hallway. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer because I knew the way, and knew that if the light went out completely, it would be impossible to see anything in there. As I approached the door, I felt the air getting heavier. Like when you enter a stuffy place where no one has been for days, you know? But it was clean, sterilized, ventilated. It didn't make sense. I opened the circuit breaker compartment. Everything seemed fine. No shorts, no tripped switches. I touched the cables, closed it, and stood there for a few seconds, trying to hear anything beyond the hum of the electricity. That's when I heard it. A kind of metallic creak coming from the end of the wing. Low, prolonged, and soon after, a voice. Or rather, a sound that seemed like a voice. Weak, drawn out, laughing. My body froze instantly. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and for a moment I considered simply running to the exit and not looking back. But my curiosity was stronger. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know if that was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I started walking slowly toward the preparation room. The light still flickered, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Each step echoed as if I were walking inside an abandoned church. When I turned the corner that led to the gurneys, I almost dropped the flashlight. Margaret, sitting on one of the gurneys. She was there, the body motionless, but with eyes wide open, not blinking, just staring at me. The smile, that same smile from when she arrived, was still on her face. But now it seemed bigger, more distorted, as if it had been forcefully sculpted. Her disheveled hair fell over her shoulders, and her hands rested on her lap, fingers slightly curled as if waiting for something. I froze. I couldn't take a step. The flashlight illuminated her face directly, and it was at that moment that she laughed. It wasn't loud. It was a muffled, guttural laugh, as if it had come from inside her dried throat. A sound that seemed to scratch the air, a sound that shouldn't have been possible. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I ran as if my life depended on it. I crossed the hallway, hit the office wall, and almost tripped over the chair. I grabbed the landline phone, hands trembling, and dialed the hospital's emergency number. The on-call doctor answered sleepily. But as soon as I said that something was wrong with Mrs. Tremblay's body and that she had moved, no, that she had appeared sitting on a gurney with her eyes open and laughing, he said he would come down immediately. It didn't take 5 minutes for him to arrive with 2 security guards. The 3 of them entered the wing with me while I trembled and tried to explain what I had seen. The body was no longer on the gurney. It was back in the cold chamber compartment, locked. No signs of tampering. But the detail that almost made me vomit was this. The door lock was on the inside, as if someone, or something, had voluntarily locked themselves in there. The doctor, skeptical, thought I was having a breakdown from exhaustion. He almost had me sent for observation, but he allowed the body's cremation to be expedited. The official reason, biological risk due to possible exposure to cadaveric gases. The truth, no one wanted to face it head-on. 2 days later, Margaret was cremated. The morgue underwent a thorough cleaning, lights replaced, camera system reinforced. Since then, there have been no more strange occurrences. The atmosphere became lighter, but sometimes when I return to that night shift, I still feel an energy lingering, a kind of shadow in the corner of my vision, a shiver that comes out of nowhere even when it's not cold, as if a part of her were still there, just watching, waiting, laughing softly where no one can hear. Creepy, right? What did you think of that story? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. There are some things you just never forget, like the sound of laughter coming from a body that should have stayed silent. And the next story, it's even more disturbing because it all started when a body suddenly moved on its own. In my first week on the job, I already knew that this morgue wasn't a normal place. It wasn't just the heavy smell of formaldehyde and cold flesh, or the constant hum of the refrigeration system that seemed to whisper things down the hallway. It was something more, an odd feeling as if time inside ran differently. The air was thick, and even though the lights were always on, the shadows seemed to stretch further than they should. I worked the night shift. I started at 11 and finished at 7 in the morning, when the sun hit the steel door of the side entrance directly. I never liked the absolute silence of the shift, but it paid well, and since I had been unemployed for months, I accepted without thinking twice. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Matheson, was a stern man who barely made eye contact. On my first shift, he gave me a quick tour of the rooms, pointing out where everything was, as if he were showing me a storage room for boxes, not human bodies. This is the cold chamber. If you have any doubts about the inventory, go in and count again. It's not uncommon for a number to be off. I found it strange for him to say that. Like, how does a body just disappear or appear out of nowhere? But I just nodded and followed him. I heard from the older technicians that there were rumors, people who said they had heard voices or seen doors opening by themselves. One guy even quit after a night when, according to him, the lights in the autopsy room turned on by themselves 3 times, always at 3:33 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just talk to scare the new guy, until the 3rd night. That's when everything started to go wrong. I was doing the end of shift checklist, noting the number of bodies, movements, that kind of thing. All that was left was checking the cold chamber. I grabbed my clipboard, put on my gloves, opened the heavy metal door, and went straight to the back, where the bodies were on numbered shelves. The temperature in there was bone-chilling, even with the thick lab coat. I started counting softly, 1, 2, 3, until I reached the 14th body. That's when I saw it. One of the sheets moved. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't my imagination. The sheet fluttered slowly, as if someone were breathing underneath. I froze. I tried to convince myself that it could be the refrigeration system blowing air through some gap, but it didn't make sense. I had never seen anything like that before. I got closer. The sheet covered the entire body except for the feet. And then I noticed something even stranger. The big toe of the right foot was slightly turned, as if it had changed position. That gave me such a strong chill that my hands started to sweat inside the gloves. Still, I approached and pulled the sheet up to the chest of the corpse. It was an elderly woman, wrinkled skin, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. That's when I looked at her face and realized she was facing me. The body had been positioned face down, I was sure of it. We always check that. But now she was facing directly at me, and worse, it seemed like her eyes were slightly open, as if they had been trying to open when I pulled the sheet. I took 2 steps back, almost slipping on the cold tile. I held the clipboard tightly, trying to regain control. It's just your imagination. You're tired. It's all in your head. But before I could leave the room, I heard it. A moan, low, hoarse, coming from the back of the chamber. It wasn't the sound of a machine or ice cracking. It was human. I turned slowly. The sound came again. A long moan like someone trying to call for help with a collapsed lung. I couldn't take it. I dropped the clipboard on the floor and ran out of the chamber, pushing the door hard. I crossed the dark hallway without looking back, feeling that clear sensation of being watched, as if someone were right behind me about to touch me. I went straight to Dr. Matheson's office without knocking. He was there, writing something on a chart, as if nothing had happened. When he saw me, with my panting breath and pale face, he just raised an eyebrow. "Was it in the cold chamber?" he asked, as if he already knew. I couldn't answer right away. I just nodded, trying to understand why he seemed so calm. He closed the chart, stood up slowly, and took a key from the drawer. "Come with me, we need to check something." With every step I took behind Dr. Matheson, the urge to quit grew. I didn't want to go back to that room. The feeling I had was of being dragged back into a nightmare from which I had just escaped. The hallway seemed longer, the air thicker, and even though the floor was clean, the sound of our steps echoed as if there were something wet nearby, like when you step on something that shouldn't be there. We reached the cold chamber door. He put the key in the lock, turned it calmly, and pushed the door open as if it were just another normal night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, and I stopped at the entrance. He went in first. "Come, I need you to see this too." I took a deep breath and entered. The chamber was the same except for the clipboard I had left on the floor. He walked straight to the woman's body. I stayed a little further back, watching with my stomach in knots. He pulled the sheet firmly and examined her face. No changes. Eyes closed. Head turned to the left side, standard position. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was as if everything had returned to normal, as if I had imagined it all. But I knew I hadn't. I had seen it with my own eyes. "Did you touch her?" I asked, still not able to fully enter the room. He shook his head. "I haven't touched this body since it arrived yesterday. It came from a nursing home in Elmswood. Apparently, a natural death. But..." He paused and looked at me. "This isn't the first time someone has reported movement in here." I stayed quiet. The ice on the floor began to seep through the soles of my sneakers. He covered the body again, picked up the clipboard and handed it back to me. "Go home today, sleep, tomorrow you come back, but if this happens again, write everything down, every detail, and come to me directly." I nodded, even though I didn't want to come back. I left there more confused than scared. On the way home, I kept thinking if it could all be in my head. Lack of sleep, suggestion from the rumors, who knows? But deep down, something told me it wasn't just that. In the following weeks, I continued working the same hours. Always fearful, always alert. And despite everything seeming calm, I started to notice small details. The refrigeration system sometimes turned off for seconds, as if interrupted by a presence. Objects moved places, and a strange smell, half sweet, half rotten, started to appear always in the same corner of the preparation room. But the worst was when I started to hear noises. Footsteps, not dragging, like mine. They were light, quick footsteps, as if someone were walking barefoot down the hallway. Several times I left the room to check, thinking it was the security guard or another employee. But there was never anyone. Just the emergency light flickering on the ceiling. I endured it for almost 2 months, until one night while filling out reports in the back room, I heard someone knock 3 times on the cold chamber door. 3 dry knocks. It wasn't pipes cracking. It wasn't a leak. It was the knock of someone who wanted to get out. And this time, I didn't go to check. I left everything there and went home. The next day, I requested a transfer to the morning shift. I made up that I had sleep problems, but Dr. Matheson didn't question it. He just nodded with a look that said, "I understand." After that, everything became more bearable. The daylight brought a false sense of security, but the fear remained, just disguised. Still, the things I experienced in that cold room never left my mind. I tried therapy. I talked to a trauma specialist. He told me that what I experienced could be explained by stress, extreme fatigue, or even auditory hallucinations. But at no point could he explain why other people saw and heard the same things, or why, to this day, the security camera in the cold chamber continues to show interference always at the same time, 3:33 in the morning. I went back to working at the morgue some time later, with more care, with less courage, never alone again. I avoid passing by the cold chamber, and every time I hear a noise coming from that direction, I ignore it. But there's one thing I can't ignore. Every time I pass by the steel door of the cold room, I feel that same cold, different from the air conditioning. A cold that comes from within, as if there were something there, waiting. Something that doesn't want to be ignored. Something that still breathes, even when the heart has long stopped. And when people ask me why I continue working here, I just answer with a forced smile. Because the truth is, after a while, the fear stops being a surprise. It becomes routine. And the routine in this place smells of formaldehyde, too much silence, and whispers that no one admits to hearing. That was bizarre. After watching a corpse turn its head and let out a moan in the dark, it's hard to ever trust the silence of the night again. But sometimes the real danger isn't inside a morgue, like in the next story, where 3 friends discover something terrifying right outside their house. Everything was set for a quiet weekend. Just us, video games, pizza, and a chance to take a break from the hectic school routine. Me, Jeff, and Kyle had been friends since elementary school. The kind of friendship that withstands time, rough patches, and even uncomfortable silences. We understood each other with just a look. So when Jeff invited us to spend the weekend at his place, we didn't think twice. We just threw our backpacks on and went. Jeff's house was a bit secluded, in an older part of the neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion or anything, but it had 2 floors and a huge backyard. The kind of place that seems cool during the day but takes on a different vibe at night. There were some big trees near the fence, casting long shadows on the ground. The street was really quiet. Too quiet. You could even hear the sound of your own footsteps on the sidewalk. The plan was to use the time to finish a biology project, eat junk food, and play games until the early hours. We started the afternoon off well, dividing up tasks, researching stuff on the laptop, and Jeff making some sandwiches in the kitchen. Everything was normal. His mom, Carla, had told us she was going to work a double shift at the hospital and wouldn't be back until the next day. So the house was ours. We laughed, told dumb jokes, and got distracted by anything and everything. Around 9 at night after dinner, we started playing in Jeff's room. But in the middle of a game, the TV flickered. A quick black screen, then it came back, and the sound was lower, muffled. Kyle thought it was interference from the outlet and went to check the cable. Just as he stood up, we all heard it. A sharp noise from the backyard, like a branch breaking, or heavy footsteps on wet earth. We just looked at each other. Jeff tried to laugh it off, said it was probably a cat or some animal, but no one went to check. We went back to the game, trying to ignore it, but less than 5 minutes later it happened again, this time louder. It sounded like someone was walking very slowly, dragging their feet. We went to the hallway window, which overlooked the backyard. It was dark out there, just a part lit by the faint light of the street lamp. And that's where we saw it. There was a figure standing still, motionless, very thin, tall. You could see the outline of its bones through the tattered clothes. Its face seemed covered by something, like a sack or some kind of veil. And further back, among the trees, you could make out other shapes. At least 2, maybe 3. We froze for a few seconds. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as if someone had blown cold air there. Kyle took a step back and let out a quiet curse. Jeff yanked the curtain shut, pale, and said we should lock the doors. The energy in the house had changed, as if something had entered with that strange silence that followed. We ran to the kitchen, locked the back door, and Jeff called his mom. He told her what we'd seen. She tried to calm us down, said it could be a neighbor, that the backyard was open, anyone could get in. But you could tell in her voice that she was unsettled. She said she was coming back, that we should stay inside and not open the door for anything. While we waited, we decided to go upstairs to the bedroom. No one wanted to play video games anymore. We just sat on the floor near the window trying to listen for anything. And that's when the light flickered again. But this time, it didn't come back on. The house was pitch black. Kyle pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight while Jeff ran downstairs to get a candle. That's when the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No one had the courage to answer. Jeff froze halfway down the stairs. The doorbell rang again and stopped. When his mom finally arrived about 15 minutes later, she found us locked in the bedroom with the wardrobe pushed against the door. She came in asking what was going on, and Jeff tried to explain. But she looked out at the backyard, looked at us, and just shook her head. "There's no one out there, guys. You must have imagined it." She tried to turn on the kitchen light and noticed the circuit breaker had tripped. She flipped it back on and everything returned to normal. But the feeling, that negative energy, was still there. Jeff's mom stayed with us for a while longer, then went to sleep in her room, saying we needed to rest. But Kyle and I didn't want to spend the night there at all. We grabbed our backpacks and left without looking back. As we turned the corner, it was Kyle who noticed. On the other side of the street, right behind the ivy-covered wall, there was a rusted sign. The streetlight hit it in a way that we could read, "Municipal Institute of Forensic Medicine." It was a morgue. Jeff's house was right next to the city morgue's back wall, and we had never noticed. We ran from there as if hell itself was after us. We went straight to my house, where my mom took us in looking scared, but didn't ask too many questions. We all slept in the same room, too afraid to close our eyes for long. The image of those figures in the backyard wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning in the daylight, everything seemed calmer. Jeff texted saying he was okay. Later, when we met again at school, he pulled us aside, hesitant. And that's when he told us. He said it wasn't the first time he'd seen those figures in the backyard. That when he was little, he would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like he was being watched. And that sometimes he heard dragging footsteps near the window. But no one had ever believed him. What he hadn't told us before was that his grandpa had worked at the morgue next door for over 20 years, and that he had died inside the house, after a massive heart attack, in the same room where we had spent that night. Since then, we've avoided Jeff's house. He ended up moving away after a while, but to this day I can't go near that block without feeling that same eerie presence, that heavy sensation in the air, as if someone, or something, was still there, waiting. Scary stuff, huh? That night stayed with those boys forever. But what they saw outside can't even compare to what some people experience inside a funeral home. In the next story, an employee learns the hard way that the dead don't always stay where they're supposed to. But before we move on, if you've made it this far, that probably means you're enjoying these stories. So hit the like button to let YouTube know you're into this kind of content. And make sure you don't miss the next terrifying story. When the door to that room shut by itself for the third time that night, I knew something in that place didn't want to stay silent anymore. My name is Peter, and I didn't have big aspirations when I started working at Belmont & Sons Funeral Home. It was a quiet job, or at least it was supposed to be. The building was old, with stone columns at the entrance and darkened stained glass windows that filtered the light in a way that made everything seem sadder than it already was. It was the kind of place that seemed to absorb the grief of the families who passed through. And over time, the sadness lingered in the walls, the floor, the scent, as if the place itself wept from time to time. At first, the silence was what bothered me the most. Not just any silence, but a heavy, muffled silence, as if someone were always breathing softly in the next room. You could hear the creaking of the wood, the faint squeaking of doors, and sometimes footsteps. But when you went to check, the hallway was empty. I even tried to justify it as something in my head, but it wasn't just me. Mrs. Martha, the longest-serving employee, used to say that the building was full of memories that don't want to leave. She'd say these things while polishing urns and straightening flowers, as if it were normal to live with unseen presences. It was she who told me about Mr. Klaus, the former director of the funeral home. According to her, he had died right there, in his office while smoking one of his foul-smelling cigars. And according to others, he never really left. Stories about him always came with two things: doors slamming shut on their own, and a strong smell of tobacco, as if someone had lit a cigar just minutes before. The first time I smelled it was on a night when I stayed late organizing the crematorium records. The door to Mr. Klaus's office opened slowly, without wind, without a touch, and with it came that smell, dense, bitter, as if someone were there watching me. There was no one, but I froze for a few seconds, with the absurd certainty that if I turned around too quickly, I would see something. But what really started to affect me was that urn. It was a simple piece made of dark wood, with a small metal plaque that read only James D.H. No one ever came to claim it. It just sat there, in the niche on the back shelf, where almost no one touched it. Every time I passed by, I felt a different weight in the air, as if the space around it became tighter, as if it were hard to breathe, and sometimes you could hear a faint hum, as if the air vibrated around it. I thought it was just in my head, until the day Clara, a new employee, accidentally bumped into it, and the urn fell to the floor. What happened in that instant still haunts me. There was no wind, no tremor, but all the lamps flickered at the same time. An absurd cold took over the room, as if a giant freezer had been opened. Clara fell to the floor and began to cry, saying she felt a pressure on her chest, as if something were pushing her against the floor. I tried to help, but my arms felt heavy, as if they were pulling my body down. It lasted only a minute, but it was enough to leave everyone in shock. After that, things got worse. On some nights, when I stayed in the basement organizing the embalming instruments, I heard piano music. It was always the same melody, slow, sad, almost hypnotic. The problem was the funeral home didn't have a piano, and even if it did, who would be playing at 2 in the morning? I followed the sound, but it never came from the same place. Sometimes it seemed to come from the hallway, other times from the chapel, or even from the embalming room. And when I arrived, there was nothing. One night, I was so disturbed by the melody that I looked at myself in the locker room mirror to see if I was still there. And that's when I saw him. Behind me, standing still, was a man in an old suit, the kind from the 1940s, with a handkerchief in his pocket and a pale face like a wax statue. He did nothing, just stared at me. When I turned around, there was no one. But the reflection lingered for another second, then vanished. It was from that day on that things started to follow me home. At home, I began to feel a spiritual presence. The energy in the room changed as soon as I locked the door. The lights flickered, the air grew dense, and I felt like something was with me. One night, while brushing my teeth, I saw a shadow passing through the hallway behind me, as if someone had walked through the house. I ran, checked everything, but it was locked. I lived alone. There was a night when I woke up breathless, feeling a huge weight on my chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw the figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom, just a dark silhouette, motionless, staring at me. I was paralyzed, sweating, my heart racing. I blinked and it was gone, but the feeling of being watched continued all the time. In the shower, in the kitchen, even at work, as if it had attached itself to me. Gradually, I began to lose sleep. I started locking myself in my room, sleeping with the light on, because every shadow seemed to move. I caught myself looking in the bathroom mirror, expecting to see that man again. And every time something fell by itself, or a door creaked for no reason, my heart raced as if I were being hunted. I thought a lot about all of it, about the idea that the dead stay there, trapped in the places where they were left. But I began to think that this isn't quite true. They don't stay. They follow, as if they had found a path through those who work with death every day, as if grief, sadness, pain were doors. Today, even when I'm far from the funeral home, I still feel that presence with me. No matter where I go, no matter how much time passes, it's as if something has clung to my skin. And sometimes in the silence of the early morning, when everything is quiet, I hear footsteps in the hallway, outside my bedroom, and I know I'm not alone. Creeped out yet? What did you think of that story? Give it a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. There are things the human body senses before the mind understands, like that chill running down your spine, even when the hallway is warm and stuffy. I learned this working the night shift on the oncology floor of a hospital that, honestly, has seen more goodbyes than hellos. Most people think hospitals are synonymous with healing, but where I work, Hope comes in small doses and often runs out before the shift ends. The cancer ward is heavy. I'm not just talking about the emotional weight, but an energy, a presence that envelops you. There are nights when the silence screams, and others when you hear too much. My routine is anything but glamorous. Caring for terminal patients requires more than technique. It requires presence. You spend so much time in there that you start to notice when the air changes, when the room feels emptier, even with the patient still breathing, when the spiritual presence is almost tangible, waiting for the last breath to truly manifest. There's a tradition on that floor. Every time someone passes, we open the window of their room, even if it's cold or raining. It's kind of a ritual, you know? They say it's so the spirit can leave in peace without feeling trapped. It might sound silly to outsiders, but after seeing what I've seen, this kind of gesture makes more sense than a lot of things. There was one night that stuck with me. My co-worker Jessica and I had to take the body of a man who had passed away a few hours earlier to the morgue. The elevator was broken, so we had to use the service ramp that leads to the basement. And when I say basement, don't imagine something organized, clean, and well lit. It was dark, damp, with a smell of disinfectant mixed with something unidentifiable. The kind of place that makes you think twice before stepping in. The cold chamber where we store the bodies is small, 3 drawers on each side, and a narrow corridor in the middle. Nothing too modern, just the essentials. When we placed the body inside and closed the door, a noise came from the back of the room. It was like something had scraped metal on the floor. I immediately looked at Jessica, who was already pale. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't the wind. It was different. That sent chills down both our spines. The feeling was of being watched. We ran out and only stopped when we were on the 2nd floor corridor. After that, I simply stopped going down to the morgue alone. I always made up an excuse or found a way to go with someone. To this day. It didn't matter if it was just to get an extra sheet or drop off a document. If it was in the basement, someone went with me. As the months went by, I started talking more with the hospital staff, old-timers who've seen it all. And to my surprise, almost everyone had a similar story. Andrew, for example, told me that one day he heard a voice whisper his name inside the cold chamber. He said he was sure he was alone. Nurse Lucy swore she saw a shadow running through the basement corridors and disappearing into the wall. And then there's the security guard who claims to have seen one of the bodies move on its own and then disappear from the drawer it was in. They only found it hours later, on the other side of the room. I know, it sounds like an exaggeration, but when you work with death every day, you learn not to doubt anything. The presence of death is constant. It doesn't appear with a scythe or hood. Sometimes it just changes the temperature of the room. Other times it watches you from afar, waiting for the right moment. There was one of those really heavy nights when 3 patients passed away during the same shift. I was exhausted. I had been on my feet all day and barely eaten anything. I went to the break room to try to drink some coffee, but ended up falling asleep on the sofa, with my head against the wall. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. I opened my eyes, and there was no one there. The corridor was empty, but the sound continued, as if someone were walking barefoot on the ceramic floor. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and went to peek. I saw nothing, but the sound now came from inside the ward. When I entered, all the patients were sleeping or sedated, except for the one in bed 7. Bed 7 was empty. Worse, the nurse in charge swore that no transfer had been made and that the body was still there minutes before. We searched the entire floor. We even called security. We only found the body hours later, inside one of the service elevators, already in rigor mortis. No one explained how it got there. No camera recorded any movement. That left me disturbed for weeks. Another time, I was forced to go down to the basement alone. There was no way to avoid it. The body of a woman needed to be taken immediately, and I was the only one available. I took a deep breath and went down with the stretcher. The path seemed longer than usual. The corridor light flickered every 5 seconds, and the elevator made a strange noise when it reached the ground floor. When I entered the cold chamber, I smelled a strong scent of lavender, like those old perfumes, but no one used that kind of scent there anymore. I opened the drawer to place the body, and at that moment, I heard someone behind me say very softly, "She doesn't want to be alone." I froze. I couldn't turn around. The voice was feminine, tired, but I didn't recognize it. When I finally gathered the courage and looked back, the corridor was empty, but the scent of lavender remained. I ran back to the floor and spent the rest of the night on alert, listening to every little noise as if it were the announcement of another supernatural experience. Lately, even the patients have started to comment. One of them, Mr. Marcus, told me he saw a woman in white passing by his room during the night. She didn't say anything, just watched. Another, Mrs. Selena, said that every time someone was about to die on that floor, an owl appeared at the window. Rationally, I know it could be a coincidence, but the truth is, every time that owl appeared, someone died within 24 hours. And perhaps the strangest of all was what happened to me in the break room. It was a rainy night. I was trying to nap when I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was rhythmic, as if someone were trying to get my attention. I got up and opened the door, but the corridor was completely empty. I went back inside, but the knocking started again, now louder. The third time, the door simply opened by itself. There was no wind, no draft, it just opened, and stayed there, wide open. At that moment, I felt a negative energy invade the room. A feeling of being watched took over. I looked around, but there was nothing. Still, I felt invaded, as if something had entered with that cold wind. After that night, I asked to change shifts. I couldn't. The hospital is always full, and people willing to work on the cancer ward during the night are hard to find. So, I learned to live with it, to keep the lights on, to carry a rosary in my coat pocket, and most importantly, to never, ever close the cold chamber door completely when I enter. These days, when I see someone new on the team, I try to warn them. I talk about the strange happenings, the stories of colleagues, the personal experiences each of us has lived. Some laugh, thinking it's a joke, but all it takes is one quieter night for everyone to realize that the hospital holds more than patients and medical records. It holds memories, presences, fragments of life that refuse to leave. And perhaps what we call haunting isn't a threat. Maybe it's just the echo of those who still haven't accepted that they've departed. But one thing is certain. After everything I've experienced there, I never enter a morgue again without feeling like I'm not alone. After spending so much time surrounded by death, you start to realize that the silence inside morgues isn't always peaceful. If you made it this far, comment "cold morgue," just so I know I'm not alone in this walk through the darker side of storytelling. If this kind of content gets under your skin, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. There's always something strange waiting to be told around here. Oh, and drop a like on the video, not just for the scare, but for the weird little connection we built along the way. There's another video right here that goes even deeper into this theme. Click it and keep watching with me. Just be careful what you hear in the dark.